This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, welcome to our webinar presented by EWPN, Intersect and MasterCard. So it's 3 minutes past 12 now. We've got quite a few people in the meeting already. If you are still joining, but we want to kick things off now. So the topic of today's webinar is delegated authentication for merchants to improve the checkout experience. And so we have two presenters today. The first presenter would be me. I'm Melanie. I am the co-country ambassador for EWPN, and I currently work for Intersect, which is a provider of best-in-class authentication methods, and we serve financial institutions and banks across the world to help them to improve the checkout experience or the digital experience related to banking. And with me today, I have Ria, and Ria is going to introduce herself now.
Hi, I'm Ria. I'm from MasterCard. I'm responsible for PSD2 related topics at MasterCard and everything surrounding authentication solutions. As Melanie already mentioned, Melanie and I are country ambassadors for EWPN. The European Women Payment Network is a platform for women in payments and fintech, and the country ambassadors try to regularly organize webinars and events so women and men in the payment sector can connect and widen their network and just have a support system. So if you're interested in the network, just reach out to us and we'll get you connected. Given that we don't have that much time today, I would just say we'll jump right into it. And if you have any questions, just text us in the chat through the chat function, or just let us know. Should we start?
Yep.
I just can't see your screen anymore. Are you still sharing?
I should be.
Okay.
No, I stopped sharing for some reason. Apologies. And there you go.
Perfect. I think it's frozen, just one.
Yeah. Let me try again. I'm just going to share my. Okay.
Yeah. Now I can see it. Okay, perfect. So before talking about delegated authentication, let's just have a quick look at the e-commerce market trends. As you can see, the projection for global e-commerce sales is steadily increasing, which means in future the authentication requests are going to increase as well. We've already seen this when you look at the chart pre-COVID and after COVID, that the amount has increased rapidly. The problem is that the market has not been able to adapt yet to the huge amount of requests, and which means that a lot of customers are abandoning their cart due to friction at the checkout, which translates into hundreds of billions of dollars in sales lost. Many are afraid that PSD2 is going to worsen the situation. They believe that there's going to be more friction and we're going to lose even more and more customers and sales. That's why we're here, because we've got a solution which we'd like to talk to you about, which is the next page, which is delegated authentication under PSD2. Well, on the next page, you'll see that basically PSD2 allows issuers to delegate their strong customer authentication to third parties in a PSD2 compliant way. There are a few conditions and standards which have to be met, though, such as that there has to be a bilateral contract between the issuer and the third party, that the issuer has to have evidence of the solution and need certification in case the NCA asks for evidence, and also it is important that the solution is regularly tested, evaluated, and audited. This seems like a lot of work for an issuer, and he might not do that for every merchant. If you're not big enough, he's not going to jump through all the loops just for you. So that's why MasterCard has come up with a program, namely called Authentication Express. The next page. On the next page, you'll see what our program is. It's basically a multilateral framework and a platform which we provide to issuers and merchants and wallet providers, which allows issuers in an easy and effective way to delegate their strong customer authentication. In Germany, most of the issuers are already opted in, and if merchants or wallet providers want to, they can get sponsorship through their acquirers to opt in to the program. As mentioned, this program and this framework allows you to interact with the issuer without having a bilateral agreement. And MasterCard provides the necessary components to be PSD2 compliant. On the next page, you'll see what the components are. Namely, the framework is between the issuer and the merchant and between us. So it is enough that the issuer is once enrolled in the program, and then he's automatically covered with every merchant who is enrolled in this program and doesn't need to have individual contracts with them. MasterCard also makes sure that the authentication rules and the standards are met, and make sure that the certifications and the certificates and the necessary documents are provided on a platform for the issuers and the acquirers. So everything is covered, and we believe this process is much easier for the issuer, and he'll be more likely to delegate the strong customer authentication to someone else rather than doing it in a bilateral way. As we believe that everyone should be part of this program because it's a massive improvement to the user experience, we've come up with 2 flavors so we can cover as many merchants and wallet providers as possible. So there is one option which is open to every merchant, and it's independent of their fraud level. The only thing those merchants have to do is use the biometric solution which your mobile device or your laptop provides you, and it has to meet a certain standard. And the standard we are asking for is FIDO, and Melanie is going to speak about FIDO in a bit. The other requirement is that this solution has to be certified by a lab which is approved by us, and it has to be uploaded and audited in a regular manner. Similar to whitelisting and merchant-initiated transaction, the first transaction here has to go through an ID&V with the issuer SCA. That means the very first transaction the customer has is a normal 3DS SCA transaction. Every subsequent transaction, however, is then approved and authenticated by the merchant himself. In this case, the merchant then sends the results to MasterCard. MasterCard evaluates the risk, and if everything is okay, we generate the AAV code, which is then sent back to the merchant, and he sends these results to the authorization. As you can see, I left out the issuer ACS in this bit, which is intentional because as MasterCard is generating the AAV code, the issuer ACS is not involved. In other words, the issuer cannot step up in the authentication process at all, which is great for most merchants and is quite convenient and causes less friction. To participate in this option, however, there are 2 things to remember: that the issuer and the merchant has to support EMV 3DS 2.1 or 2.2. And the other bit is that as this is an industry standard, namely FIDO, the issuer is liable here, which is the case also with Google and Apple Pay. Then there is another option, which is limited only to low fraud merchants. The merchants here can use any PSD2 compliant solution they have. However, they have to remember that their gross fraud rate has to be below 13 basis points. Similar to the other option, the first transaction is conducted with an issuer SCA, and every subsequent transaction is authenticated by the merchant himself. In this case, however, the merchant, instead of sending the transaction to us, he authenticates the transaction himself and sends an indicator and a flag in EMV3DS to the issuer, saying that the authentication has been successful, and sends his fraud rate along as well. Then the ACS, the issuer ACS, can decide whether he wants to step up or not. He has the opportunity to step up, but we at MasterCard advise against it, and there are penalties related to this as well, because the point of this program is to have a frictionless experience, and we don't want unnecessary friction. So 5% of all transactions, the issuer can decide whether he wants to step up or not. But every other transaction is supposed to be as frictionless as possible. Unlike the other, or similar to the other option, EMV3S is important here as well. You have to have the latest version, but unlike unlike option 1, you need the MasterCard extensions here. The MasterCard extensions allow you to send the merchant fraud rate along and the delegated flag to the issuer ACS. So these are really necessary for this option. As this solution is something which is a merchant-owned solution and does not require them to go through FIDO or meet any other standard, the liability lies here with the merchant. Maybe to wrap it up from my side, on the next page, I've listed the benefits for all the players in the market, and clearly the benefit for the merchant is that he knows the customer the best. So he knows where the customer might stop or abandon the cart and how to avoid that. So that's why we want to give the most control to the merchant, so he can design the user experience as he believes is the best. By doing that, we give him the possibility to lower the friction, to minimize cart abandonment, and increase transaction approval rate. For the issuer, on the other hand, the benefit of joining this kind of program is that they are compliant with PSD2. They do not need any bilateral agreement with other merchants. They know and have access to any certification they need, so there's visibility of security, and they have the assurance that they're PSD2 compliant. Additionally, in the 3DS EMV message data we send, there is additional transaction insight, so the issuer's ACS can get smarter and has more data. And lastly, we think the cardholder has the biggest benefit because the checkout experience is improved. He can avoid multiple SCAs, but while still knowing that his transaction is secured and there is less risk for fraud. And now I'd like to hand over to Melanie, who's gonna give an overview of the other schemes program and dive into FIDO.
Okay, thanks, Ria. And yeah, I'm going to quickly talk about the Delegated Authentication Program by Visa, because there's always two sides in our world. One is MasterCard, one is Visa, and the program is similar to the MasterCard Delegated Auth program. So the benefits by participating are going to be the same or very similar for merchants, issuers, and cardholders alike. And I think everyone would agree with me that if you want to offer delegated authentication, you want to offer it with both card schemes, so you cover as many cards as possible. So the biggest difference between Visa and the MasterCard program is really that Visa doesn't distinguish between the two different merchant categories. So one option that is available for all merchants and one option that is only available for low fraud merchants. For delegates or for merchants to participate in that program, they have to fulfill 4 requirements. And one requirement is that there have to be at least 12 months of Visa transaction history. The card not present fraud entry criteria has to be below 15 basis points. No history of Visa fraud and chargeback programs breaches. And they have to offer strong customer authentication. But strong customer authentication in the Visa program is very openly defined. There's a merchant assessment that the merchant has to go through. It's consistent of a questionnaire where they describe how SCA is done and how they fulfill the requirements of the EBA. And then obviously acquirers can help with filling out that questionnaire. And FIDO is not explicitly mentioned here, but I know that it shows up in the questionnaire, and I was also told that if a merchant is applying for delegated authentication and is having a FIDO-based strong customer authentication, their validation process is going to be much more easier, because FIDO is a open standard, and it's by definition PSD2 compliant. So we've talked about FIDO, Ria talked about FIDO, I talked about FIDO. So let's look into why FIDO is so central for delegated authentication. But before we do that, I just want to have a quick look at the browser landscape. So a few years ago, each browser was different. First of all, there were many different browsers out there that were actively used, and all of them were different. There isn't really any strong standards, and it led to inconsistent behavior in user journeys or how web applications would work. And today, the web landscape is much more standardized. And this is driven by organizations like W3C, for example. And today the market is really consolidated and simplified. So you have 75 running on Chrome or Chromium. That's including the Edge browser as well, which is running on an open standard by Chrome. 70% is running on Safari, and then we've got Firefox, and then 4% is the rest, like your Internet Explorer, Opera. It's almost negligible. And on the operating system, we have seen a similar simplification. So on the mobile OS, we've got Apple iOS and Google Android. Microsoft doesn't really exist anymore. And then on the desktop side, we've got Apple OS and we've got Microsoft. So on the operating system, there are also only a couple of main players left. So that is Microsoft, Google, and Apple. These are the only ones that remain, so to say. And so why is this important? Why am I telling you about this? Finally, I've got FIDO on my slide because we've talked about FIDO a lot. And FIDO stands for Fast Identity Online. And it's presented and developed by the FIDO Alliance, which is an open industry association with one mission. And their mission is to develop and support adoption of authentication standards to help reduce the world's over-reliance on passwords. Because think about it, how many online accounts do you have? How many username and password combinations do you have? Can you even manage without a password manager? I personally can't. And there's a growing consensus that passwords are not safe and should be limited or even replaced. And even though there is effective PKI, so private public key infrastructure, and strong authentication solutions in the market today, they have existed for many, many years, the barriers to widespread adoptions, they're still there. And it's mainly because consumers don't like the experience, and online service providers, they don't want to have the cost and complexity to deploy and manage strong customer authentication solutions. And that's what the Alliance is working towards. They're really working towards changing the nature of authentication with open standards that are more secure than passwords and or SMS OTP, simpler to use and easier to deploy and to manage. And they want to make authentication an open standard. And this is where we link back to the browser and operating systems, because the more consolidated this landscape is, the easier it is to aim and push for worldwide adoption of authentication standards like the FIDO Alliances came up with. And the FIDO Alliance they've been around for, I think, since 2013, and they have a massive member base with big companies like Microsoft and Apple also driving the FIDO mission. We've got Visa and MasterCard, of course, but then you also have big merchants and online services part of the Alliance. So we talk about an Amazon or Facebook. And then you've got strong customer authentication providers like Antisec supporting the FIDO Alliance and the mission as well. And so for delegated auth, FIDO 2 is relevant, and FIDO 2 is the overarching term for the FIDO Alliance's newest set of specifications, which enables users to leverage common devices to easily authenticate to online sessions in both in a mobile and a desktop environment. And FIDO 2 consists of two standardized components. On the one side, we've got the WebAuthn developed by the DW3. So that's the part of the standard that sits in the browser. So every merchant must be able to connect to that protocol. That can be done with a simple JavaScript that a solution provider can provide to a merchant. And then the second protocol is the client to authenticator or CTAP protocol. And that is the language that the authentication device speaks. And so let's talk about the authentication devices. And here is a simplified overview of these authentication devices. So the user has two options to authenticate in a FIDO use case. So there are these FIDO, roaming, or external authenticators. These are small security keys. They look like a small USB key. Some of them come with NFC, some of them come with Bluetooth. The latest security keys will be able to have a fingerprint reader as well. One example of a manufacturer of such keys would be Yubico, for example. And then you get platform authenticators. And now this is going to be really interesting, because platform authenticators are FIDO authenticators that are built into any device. So they work without additional hardware like card readers. They work in some instances even without an additional application to authenticate. And they are built into devices like any desktop that is running on Windows 10 has FIDO implemented. Any Android phone that is running on Android 7 and above is FIDO enabled. And iOS is not, so all the iPhone users out there, it's not enabled, but we think this is just going to be a matter of time. And the core to the FIDO approach is really, it's a personal device. It can be your PC, can be a smartphone, or it can be a security key. And that personal device hosts a set of cryptographic keys to securely access the FIDO-enabled services, such as Google, Facebook, PayPal. This all works already. But in the future, we also want to see more financial services in the PSD2 context and more merchants being supporting FIDO2. And when I said personal device, this is really key here, because the nice thing about the FIDO solution is you need one authenticated device for all FIDO-enabled services. So as soon as you have FIDO up and running on your device as an end user, you are not reliant anymore on hardware readers, on external tokens or a variety of external tokens. You can get rid of all your dedicated authentication apps. So you have one FIDO token, can be your phone. And with that FIDO token, you authenticate to Google, to PayPal, you authenticate when you're making a transaction with your bank, you're authenticating if a merchant running delegated auth asks you to authenticate. And that is really the beauty of it. That is just one single device that's going to make things so much easier from an end user perspective. And what is it that merchants can do with that? And what is it what merchants really want to do? Thanks to the combination of MasterCard's and Visa card delegated auth programs and the possibility offered by FIDO2, merchants can really gain back control over the user experience. Because in an e-commerce checkout experience, as soon as the authentication is kicked off, it goes to the issuer domain. The merchant has no idea what's happening. It's like a black box. And that can lead to cart abandonment and to too much friction in the user experience. And with delegated auth and FIDO2, merchants can ensure frictionless experience, avoid cart abandonment, and they can also be ensured that it's an easy implementation. So merchants can enjoy being in control of the secure customer authentication without having to do the heavy lifting. They don't have to store the security credentials or the public keys in their backend. They don't have to manage digital identities. This is all taken care of by the framework and by the FIDO standards. So for a merchant wishing to do delegated authentication, as we explained earlier, there's two options depending on the merchant's preferences, but also depending on the circumstances and the different frameworks that dictate a few requirements to be met. So any merchant can opt to do a generic SCA. What do we mean with that? A generic SCA is an SCA solution that is PSD2 compliant, and it's the same solution that banks are using today. One of the drawbacks is that you're running the risk that all of your customers have to do the SCA. They have to download a dedicated application, and the merchant has to do a lot of the heavy lifting in the backend. Whereas if a merchant opts for a FIDO enabled strong customer authentication, it's a lightweight integration. Common devices can be used. So a lot of customers already have their FIDO device in front of them. They just don't know. But it's as easy as confirming something on your phone with a fingerprint or a Face ID, and I'll show you in a second. A merchant doesn't have to worry about developing dedicated applications for authentication. It's all kind of baked into the standard. And also, as we mentioned, we think it's very attractive for merchant that if they want to do delegated auth and they go with a FIDO2 based option, that there's no liability shift. So how does the checkout experience look like in a e-commerce scenario with delegated auth? First, let's look at how it's looking in today's world with the issuer step up. So you've got a customer browsing in an online shop. They're going to the checkout, paying with credit card, putting in their details, proceed. And now the strong customer authentication on the issuer side kicks in. So there had to be an onboarding process first for that end user to be able to use that issuer's authentication. And there's a breakout to the issuer's domain. And this is where I said, this is the black box for the merchant. The merchant doesn't know what is happening. So in this case, it's a mobile-based, push-based authentication, which is the best you can get at the moment. But if the issuer relies on SMS, OTP, or hardware tokens, then the user experience is going to be very different. And if the authentication happened, it goes back to the merchant domain, and the transaction is successful. Now imagine this. So here you see you're on a laptop and you have your second device to do the authentication. Imagine if it was a mobile commerce scenario. You're on one device on one small screen, and then you have to change app, and then you have to go back. There's so many different steps that can go wrong, which then lead to cart abandonment. And here's an example with the same merchant doing its own strong customer authentication based on FIDO 2. So you see here that you're not flipping over to another app or something else is happening. You're staying in a merchant domain, and through a call out through the web auth and call out to the phone, which is an authenticator, the phone knows, okay, I need to authenticate this now. There's an authentication request, and I'm making it very simple here. And the customer is asked to verify his or her identity by, it's an overlay from the operating system. And this is something that end users are very used to, because there's so many things on our phone that we just confirm by providing our fingerprint or our Face ID. And the transaction goes through. So what are some key takeaways that we want the audience to walk away with? So beyond exemption and whitelisting, delegated authentication is really a great option for merchants to gain back control over the user experience, with the added benefit that there's no liability shift in certain cases. And MasterCard and Visa, they offer programs to participate in the delegated authentication options. And lastly, it's really also the FIDO standards driving this and enabling a better user experience on both experiences on both mobile and browser. And this is the end of our webinar. We are going to open up the floor or the chat to questions. If you have a question, type it in the chat box, but you can also unmute yourself. Let's just have a conversation. If you have questions later on, this is how you can reach us, Ria and myself, or you can also always have a chat with as a merchant, have a chat with your acquirer, and they also can guide you in what's the best option for you as a merchant. Thank you very much. Okay. Do we have any questions? Yes, the presentation is being recorded and it will be made available. You're welcome, Rishaf. Okay. Do we have any merchants here or any questions? Are really welcome. We still have time.
Melanie, a quick question, probably to Ria, right? What does it exactly mean, this program by MasterCard, and how do you jump on this program, and to whom is it, let's say, focused on whom? Maybe some
so
more information on that. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, it would be great to know from where you're coming, whether you're a merchant or PSP or acquirer or issuer, so I can give you the best answer.
None of that. But
okay, so just general information, no problem.
Yeah.
No problem. So basically, this is open to merchants and wallet providers, and open to everyone depending on the fraud rate of the merchant. You can participate in one or the other option, but also this is always of interest for PSPs or authentication solution provider like Entersec, who can then market their solution to merchants so they can use this. Does that help?
Yeah, fine.
And
Thank you.
Yeah, and if a merchant is interested in doing so, they have to speak to their acquirer to get a sponsorship, or the acquirer sponsors them to participate in our program.
All right.
I see another question regarding the issuer readiness in the market. So unfortunately, I can't tell you who is enrolled in our program and who is not, but I can tell you that most of the issuers are already enrolled. That most of the issuers are already enrolled. There are 2 or 3 issuers who are still debating whether they want to stay in the program or not, but they are reassessing it for MasterCard and Visa. And the other countries in Europe, yeah, so France is reluctant as well. At least that's what we've heard, that they're a bit reluctant, but I can't tell you any numbers regarding them because I'm only aware of the German and Swiss market.
Okay, there is another question. There are more coming in. So there's one that asks, is certification with MasterCard and Visa required? So I'm gonna speak to the Visa part, and then Ria, if you can comment on MasterCard. So certification in what sense? That is the question. But basically with Visa, if a merchant wants to participate in a delegated authentication program, they have to go to Visa, they have to register with Visa, and there's a questionnaire that a merchant together with the acquirer can fill out to explain how they do their SCA, how they're compliant with all the regulations by the regulatory body here in Europe. And based on that, Visa is allowing them into the program or not. And as I mentioned earlier, because FIDO is a trusted and known standard, if a merchant says or proves that they're doing their SCA based on FIDO, the assessment will be easier and probably a positive one if it's implemented correctly.
And for MasterCard, it's you go through your acquirer, as mentioned before, you check with the acquirer whether you are eligible for the program or not. One indicator is the fraud rate. The other one is whether you have EMB 3DS 2.1 or 2.2, whether you have any of it, and whether your solution is certified or not. But for the merchant and the wallet provider, they have that checklist with the acquirer. And if you need any more information, we always have intro sessions, and so you can always reach out to me, and I can always go through the deck again with you and with even more information. I'm seeing there are a few more questions. And unfortunately, at least we don't have any statistics regarding abandonment rates traditionally versus delegated authentication. Even though the program has been live since last year, PSD2 is not live yet. So we can't see many real transactions, only test transactions. So we can't tell you how it's going to, in the end, affect the market or not. We are quite positive. I think the entire market is quite positive. A few big merchants have already started testing. But the results, I don't think we can predict anything before next year.
Okay, and then there was one question. I use my current bank here in Botswana as my receiving bank. Is every bank enrolled in your program? Ria, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we can speak to Botswana because that session. both programs are very focused on the European and the PSD2 regulated market.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're a payment gateway provider, what you have to do is you don't enroll with us. You basically provide a solution to the merchant or the wallet provider, and then they enroll in the program. So there's nothing we do. We can help you test your solution. We can have a pilot. We can see whether it works or not. But in the end, the relationship you have is with the merchant and the acquirer, not with us in this program.
And there's another question: how would the application process work for multi-acquirer setup?
So you mean if a merchant, I'm guessing if a merchant has multiple acquirers, that you would have to set up or you have to enroll with all your acquirers so all your transactions are covered. Yeah, you have to speak to all your acquirers then.
Yeah, and there's another one: do merchants need to certify their authentication MasterCard and Visa? As that with Visa, there's a questionnaire that a merchant can fill out. But usually this is done together with the acquirer. It doesn't have to be certified in a PSD2 certification or something like that, but it has to fulfill the requirements of both MasterCard and Visa.
Yeah, for MasterCard, if it's the FIDO solution you're using, you definitely need to certify it, not with us, but lab which we approve of, and you have to provide the certification to us. Regarding the US market, well, as we mentioned, this program is actually just for the PSD2 regulated market. Identity Check Express, so the FIDO solution Melanie presented, is being piloted in India as well with MasterCard. And the US, I think the focus for now is the EU market. I don't know whether that's the case for Intersect as well, but for us at least.
Yeah, I mean that. I think because it's driven by the programs, by Visa and MasterCard, these programs. Having said that, if there are merchants in the US who are keen to offer a FIDO solution just to make sure that their services they provide, their end users or their customers can connect and consume these services in a more secure manner, by all means, they can implement a FIDO2 based authentication. No one is stopping any merchant from that. I think it would be very welcome because it's just making the whole space more secure. But since there's no mandate for strong customer authentication in a European way, I understand that their schemes don't roll out the delegated auth framework in that way.
Regarding the question, is there already defined lab from MasterCard for certification? There is a list. If you just reach out to me and drop me an email, I'll get it to you.
Okay, let's see if there's some more questions coming in. And if not, I think we can wrap it up. Thanks everyone for showing up and for asking so many questions. So I'm very glad that this topic sparked interest and sparked active communication from everyone here attending. That's very nice to see. And yeah, as I said earlier, our contacts are still here. You can reach out to Ria and myself anytime if you have more questions. Ria, do you want to say anything that might not have been mentioned yet?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for listening and joining the webinar. If you have any questions, like I said, just reach out to me. if you're from the German market, I can definitely help you out. If not, I can connect you with the correct people. If there's anything else you need in terms of MasterCard's terms and regulations or the standards, just drop me an email and I'll try to help as much as I can.
Okay, fantastic. So we are going to close the webinar now. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And yeah, as I said, the session was recorded and we are going to distribute the recording soon. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.